Pastor, how do I do that if I'm so far away? Well, you can mail in a check. You can, save it up till you get back. Sure, great. Or you can use the link on our Topsail Baptist Church Facebook page or on the website to give. If you have any questions about that, please reach out. Pastor, why are you always talking about money? I am hardly ever talking about money. So, just figured I'd mention it. But Steve?
Plate brought back.
Yeah, and the plate is in the back for those present. We've got just a few present. And the offering plate is in the back. And we will do that. Okay, I want to jump right into the lesson this morning. I'm taking a minute and a half just talking about money. And so we'll take a little bit longer than that talking about the kingdom. I'd like to pray. And then we'll jump right into it. Father, I love you. Thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, the man among men, the divine man, the Son of Man, the fully human, fully God, Jesus Christ. Yeshua Menasaret, Jesus from Nazareth, the one who came to save his people from their sins. Thank you for including me in the covenant. Thank you for introducing me into your kingdom through your Son, Jesus. And now as we look at the teachings of Jesus, Father, I'm asking that you would open our eyes and minds to the truth of your word. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Cool beans. Thanks again for tuning in. I kind of like this new live stream option where we're streaming to YouTube and Facebook, not just because we can reach more people, but because I can't see how many people are watching. So it's kind of nice because, you see it go like 4 people, 19 people, 12 people. I'm like, was it something I said? So that'll go up there. Don't need to be seeing it myself. We are in a sermon series called Fully Fulfilled, and we're going through the Gospel according to Matthew. The Gospel according to Matthew. This is lesson 8, or message 8, or sermon 8, whatever you want to call it, in our series. Last week we took a look at the definition, development, delivery, description, and design of the kingdom of heaven. I cannot wait to get back together. There is plenty of candy that needs to be thrown out to the crowd, and I assure you, we will have premium candy. None of this, dum-dum lollipops and Whoppers and,
Jelly beans.
Jelly bean, Jolly Rancher. None of this stuff. That's kid league. We're going big leagues. All right, we're doing the real thing. So I'm telling you, it is going to be an all-out party when we get back together. So fast from sugar for the last week of April, because it looks like in May we might be able to get back together from what it looks like. All right, flatten this curve, and until then, hang in there. So last week we took a look at those 5 parts of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus came, if you remember, Jesus came and claimed that the kingdom that everybody had been waiting for was happening now. Amen? We good on that so far? Okay. And that it was happening in himself. He wasn't just saying, okay, the kingdom's here, I'm going to introduce this kingdom and I'll be off. That was John the Baptist's job. Yeah. Jesus said, the kingdom is at hand and it's happening in me. It's happening in me. The fact that the kingdom was happening in Jesus Christ was good news, good tidings, the word gospel. So when we talk about the gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom is that Jesus is saying the kingdom is here and it's in me and in you. This began, the kingdom of Jesus, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God began with Jesus calling people to himself, starting with, anybody remember? What group of people, like what job? Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Just reminded that bus song, right? I will make you fishers of men, fishers. All right, I won't sing the whole thing, but I'm just saying. Yeah, and we say, what in the world are they talking about, fishers of men? Well, it becomes clear from the first thing that Jesus said that he likes to riff off his surroundings. Like when he was at the feast and he said, I am the bread of life. You know what I'm talking about? He's ripping off his surroundings. He's looking around and he said, okay, how can I get these people to understand some simple truths? Pastor Kevin talked about the most profound truths are in simplicity. Jesus was the master of that. If you look through the Bible from Genesis 1 all the way to the end, there is so much extraordinary stuff in the Bible, even creation itself, that if God were to try to explain it to us intellectually, we wouldn't even begin to understand his language. That's right. But instead he uses simple things to help us understand. So, that's why in our age of science we say, how could God have possibly... Okay, that's like a child looking at their parents and be like, how could you possibly say I'm going out and then you hop in the van and disappear and then the van reappears? Well, you don't understand, like vans go vroom. But children don't understand everything. See, they don't get it. They think it's like those little GIFs that you see on the internet. You hold up a blanket, and then you disappear around a corner, and they're all like, my parent disappeared! You know, that sort of thing. Animals, kids, it's very limited understanding. But God chooses to reduce things to simple for us. For us. So, you cough. Rona.
Sneeze.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So, anyway. So, here's the deal. Jesus is calling people to follow him, to join themselves to the kingdom. And this began with lowly fishermen. And this was extended to sick people, oppressed people, people who couldn't help themselves. Does this remind you of anybody in 1 Samuel? David, right? In the cave of Adullam, the cave of refuge. Yes, that's what happened. Sick people and people who couldn't help themselves, people who couldn't pay their debts were flocking to David. Why? Because they recognized him as a righteous king. And as we'll learn this morning, righteous is never a word. This is... I know like the heresy flags are going to go up, but I need you to try your best to understand. Righteous is never a word that can exist with just one person. The term righteousness always means rightness with regards to relationships with others. Always. Even with God. God is righteous, yes, because he is always right toward others. Righteousness is not a solo event. Holiness, yes. Purity, yes, we get it. But righteousness always has to do with rightness. Rightness. Now, we use that phrase, and I think the New Testament writers use that phrase. We can understand that phrase as the state of being holy. Mekadesh has to, the Hebrew, has to do with being holy or sanctified or set apart. But righteousness in and of itself always has to do with rightness with others. And so they recognized David was a righteous king. He was going to do right by them. They weren't afraid to come to him. You see, same thing with Jesus. Jesus said, hey, follow me. And they dropped their nets and they recognized this one as righteous. Someone who's going to do right by them, to have right relationships with them. So, that's all chapter 4, leading into chapter 5, because at Thompson Baptist Church, 4 C's are king. I love it. Christ, context, character, and communion. You can't have good communion with others if you don't have right character. You can't have good character if you're not reading the Bible in context. And you don't have a Bible to read in context if you don't have Christ as king. Whoa! It's awesome. I love it so much. Pastor Kevin's idea. All right, so here's the thing. Sorry, I don't want to blame you for it if it stinks. So we'll call it shared. Right. So anyways, today we're going to look at the gospel of the kingdom, bookended by 2 similar phrases. So look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people. So this sick rabble, this marginalized outcast group was coming to Jesus, and he was healing them and restoring them. Now, look at Matthew chapter 9. I said last week that the gospel of the kingdom, the teaching of the kingdom, is contained in Matthew 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 5 through 7 in word, 8 and 9 in deed. So look at Matthew chapter 9. 9 verse 25. Excuse me, I wrote 25, it's 35. Whoops. And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. Now wait a minute, that's like a carbon copy of the other verse, right? I see these as bookends to what this gospel of the kingdom really is. And the text by itself bears out that Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and 9 really are the description, if you will, of what the gospel or good news of the kingdom of heaven is. And there's no better way to start talking about the kingdom of heaven than with Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. So, that's what we're going to be. What we're about to see is called the Sermon on the what? Yeah, Sermon on the Mount, classic. It's been known this way at least since Augustine, or Augustine, as you might say. Whenever I think Augustine, I think of Augustus Gloop. I think of the chubby kid in Willy Wonka who fell into China. So Augustine, right? I actually have my small quarrels on whether or not this should even be called a sermon for a few reasons I won't really get into here. I think Jesus maybe initially did this discourse on the Mount, or Sermon on the Mount, but I think he talked about this sort of thing everywhere he went. This wasn't necessarily a cutaway sermon as much as it is a description of what Jesus spent 3 years doing. Everywhere he went, he would say these discourses. This was, in effect, a stump speech. You say, what do you mean a stump speech? Everybody who is running for president has their own stump speech. They'll say it in Iowa, they'll say it in Florida, and with the difference of, instead of, how's everybody in Houston? They'll say, how everybody in Vancouver? But they say the exact same stuff. So they contextualize their message, they riff off of local things, but Jesus essentially seems to have a stump speech. And you say, what do you mean a stump speech? Jesus is the coming king, and he's inaugurating himself. And he's going to say, this is my stance on the issues. Right? This is the incoming king saying, this is my inauguration speech. This is what my kingdom's going to look like. And instead of vote for me, it's pick the right side. Because there's already a kingdom. There's already a king in which they live, under whose rule they submit. So Jesus is coming and says, actually, I've got another whole thing. And I'm going to tell you what my kingdom is like. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Get the idea? Constant invitations, wooing, and if he had anything malicious underneath his belt, you might say it was beguiling, it was tricking. But Jesus had only good to offer. Maybe that's why there were so many people suspicious of him, because they said, "What in the world is this guy offering us? What in the world's happening? Is he going to turn around and get us?" Because that's what they were used to. You see. Being hook, line, and sinkered into something. Now, this remains quite possibly the most famous section of Christ's teaching, but I would submit to you that perhaps for all the wrong reasons. We're going to get to that in a second. Even more particularly, this first section of the Sermon on the Mount is known as the Beatitudes. Saints, I didn't even look up what Beatitudes means. I knew what it meant before. I don't really care. It's even more well known than the rest of the Sermon on the Mount altogether, because right after he gets done with these Beatitudes, he starts saying some pretty hard things, doesn't he? They're not as pretty and pithy, and they don't make wall calendars quite as easily as the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. If you look at a woman and, oh, wait a minute, I don't like that one as much, right? Go back to the first page. Let's say in January, All right, how about this? Jesus was saying these Beatitudes, 9 blessings, this is so important. This is our topic sentence. He's describing the blessings that would be attached to those who would attach themselves to his kingdom. Jesus is describing the blessings that would be attached to those who would attach themselves to the kingdom of heaven. Which, by the way, Christ said was at hand. I assure you that these 9 blessings on this list are not benign, powerless, shallow, cute, pithy, moral platitudes. They are not just good teaching. They are definitely not ethics lessons. They characterize a life that's completely upside down. Listen, there is nothing desirable about the 9 blessings. Let's just read them. And seeing the multitude, chapter 5, verse 1, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Right there, well, let's just do this. Does anyone want to be poor in any way, shape, or form? Well, I wish to be poor in spirit. Jesus said, no. This is not a list. This is where I think we get a lot of the Beatitudes wrong. This is not a list of things we should strive to be. So wait a minute. No, just hold up. I promise you, hold up. This is not a list of things we should strive to be. This is a list of the inevitable characteristics of those who follow Jesus. Oh, you're talking about the fruit of the Spirit. No, not even that. Hang in there. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, which doesn't mean what you think it means. Blessed are the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers. Peacemaker, that's actually an undesirable state when it really comes down to it. We'll talk about that in a second. Persecuted, reviled and persecuted. Say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Anybody ever had anybody say something that wasn't true about you? Did it feel bad? All right, let's jump into the text, or into the lesson, I suppose. First, I want to talk about to whom Jesus is speaking, because if we don't talk about to whom Jesus is speaking, we'll never understand these Beatitudes. I mean that. We'll always understand it wrong. Really think about it. Rome had just brought in clean water. Y'all still with me? Everybody online still with me? Hang in there. Rome had just brought in clean water, a stable economy, wartime security, and wealth and pleasures galore. With the exception of stable economy at the moment, that reminds us of a place, doesn't it? Come on. America, yes? Yeah, we've got everything, man. We got everything. This is great. But at the same time, this created a monster for people who were on the other side of the divide. See, in America, we like to try to make sure that everybody catches up. I really do think that that's a desire. Outside of maybe some sinister working, on the whole, we don't want anyone to be left behind. I think that's a virtue of the United States of America. I really do. In Rome, they didn't have welfare. They didn't have food stamps. They didn't have hospitals. They didn't have uncompensated services. If you needed your appendix taken out or whatever, you better have your denarii and your shekels and your talents up front. Yeah. There was no Hippocratic oath. You say, well, there was technically a Hippocratic. No, please don't understand, or please don't misunderstand. There was no moral obligation in their minds, in the entire civilization of Rome, outside of taking care of their soldiers. We do see that. They did have hospitals for their soldiers. They didn't have public hospitals until the 4th century when Christians started them, you see. So Rome brings in a mighty, strong world power, just like the Medo-Persian Empire, just like the Babylonian Empire, right? But these empires are not known for their peace, for their harmony. Come on, are you with me? These empires are known for their power and their subjugation and their domination. And so because of this, there is a society created where many are left behind to live in the slums. No welfare, food stamps, medical care. They are shoved to the margins of civilized living. They are the truly marginalized. Let me help you. Today, we have this phrase that we see in the news a lot and maybe here. Oh, what about the marginalized? I would insist that in the United States of America, most people who are considered marginalized would not be considered marginalized according to the standards of Matthew chapter 5. Does that make sense? The poorest people in America still have some degree of access to wealth. You say, that's not a fair statement. I know there's tragedy, but I would argue, and you might call me a monster or a heartless person for arguing this, but I would argue nonetheless that most of the people who are in destitution in America are so because they have squandered their opportunity for taking care of themselves and the ones that are under their care. Right. Most. Not all, most. And for those, it's still the church's responsibility to take care of them. We understand that, but that's besides the point. So, now we've got a dystopian, competitive, brutal, cutthroat society up here. You know, et tu, Brute, right? People fighting and vying for power. Remember how Herod got his seat? Yeah. King Herod? Yeah. Well, he was half Arabian, half Jew. He was perfect to rule that place. But how did he? He wasn't part of the bloodline. He sneaked his way in there with money, power, and seduction. You get the idea? That's how these things operated. If you didn't have what you want, you would kill someone until you got it. And that wasn't the exception, ladies and gentlemen. That was the norm. That was the norm. So we have people who are left outside of this sphere of operations, the marginalized. Those are the people to whom Jesus is speaking. I just wrote here, Jesus is talking to the trash. You say, that's not nice. I know. He's talking to the ones we might make fun of at Walmart, or the ones I might judge at McDonald's. Yeah. The other day I was driving by McDonald's, and there was this person who looks like they might cut me off coming out of McDonald's, and the person... it looked like they might not have taken care of themselves the way I would, and it was grossly overweight. And I thought, last place she needs to be is at McDonald's. And then I thought, gee willikers, how un-Christ-like was that? I'm just being real, right? You say, Pastor, you shouldn't admit that you thought that. I'll tell you what, if you've never had a thought like that, you can pick up a stone. You know what I mean? Let's pull some John chapter 8 stuff. Yeah, I think we all struggle with that, and we say, that person doesn't need to be here. Or if there's come on. Or if somebody says, oh man, I just got a check from Donald Trump. Well, maybe you should use that to start paying your way instead of leeching off the government, right? Come on, we tend to marginalize people further. because of our station in life. Oh, people, well, they're just eating about, they're just, oh man, why I won't go to Walmart? Well, who are you, sir, man? Come on. I mean, Jesus had people follow him who were trash. You say, Pastor, stop calling people trash. No. I'm saying that on purpose. It's a harsh, unfair term. But that's who, when they saw Jesus walking around with people following him everywhere, it wasn't Caesar. Yeah. It wasn't the rich people. If you look at Roman civilization, they already had it made, man. They walked into their house, they touched their God, their house, God blesses them. They have everything they need. They have running water, for heaven's sakes. But the outcasts, the ones who still have to shop at Walmart instead of Pottery Barn, the ones who still have to shop at Target instead of Williams-Sonoma. You get the idea? The outcast. And by the way, the divide was much more real there than it even is here in America, believe it or not. So we've talked about to whom Jesus is speaking. Let's tackle one more context point before we talk about the blessings. Okay, everybody all right with that? Online, in person? All right. They're like, well, I can't do anything about it. He's going to keep going. Okay, watch. The concept of being blessed, what does it mean to be blessed? The concept of being blessed is actually rooted in the Hebrew Scriptures. Can anybody think of any times in the Bible where we read the word blessed in the Old Testament? Just throw one out there for me. Oh, I know we're live streaming. Psalm 1? Blessed is the man who walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. He is blessed. Turn over to Psalm 119. Go for it. Let's do it. You don't have to turn. I'm going to turn there. Psalm 119. The most well-known poem in poetic history. Look at the first verse. Blessed are the undefiled in the way who walk in the law of the Lord. Blessed are they that keep his testimony and that seek him with the whole heart. These are true. There is nothing wrong with this psalm. That psalm is correct. This Hebraism, this Hebrew way of speaking was very common, and it's rooted all the way back in the Jewish Hebrew tradition. And so when he starts speaking, he opened his mouth, verse 2, immediately after the very first word, they would have said, oh, this is the rabbi. Does that make sense? Yes. Because he is joining in the rabbinic tradition of teaching how to be blessed. You see? Now, this is where it gets really cool. The guys who translated the Septuagint, the Essenes, these guys will go into the desert, and they actually wrote their own book of Proverbs. And it's blessed is the man who this, blessed is the man who this, because they were teachers, they thought they were better than everybody else, and so they secluded themselves, which, instead of being a light to a dark world, they said, we're going to go isolate ourselves, the monastery mindset, right? The Benedictine option, so to speak, right? The Benedict option, excuse me. How about this guy? It's another guy named Jesus ben Sirah. You say, what is he all about? About 150 years before Christ was born, he wrote his own Proverbs. Except even though there were a lot of them that were really good, there were a couple of them that were a bit off. He said, the one who loves the Lord is blessed and he is superior to everyone else. That sort of thing. You know what I mean? The one who has many friends and speaks so that people listen to him is blessed. Is that untrue? Well, not necessarily from a certain point of view. You still follow? It does make sense that when someone walks into the home and everybody says, oh, the master of the home is here, he is blessed. You see, there's a certain truth to that. I get where they're coming from. But here, so you have this, oh, listen, this is so important. You have this tradition of rabbis who would teach from the Bible or from their own discourses what it means to be blessed. And they would all center around the same thing. Obey the law of the Lord. Love the Lord. You'll be superior. You'll be lifted up and elevated. You'll have wealth. You'll have prosperity. Come on, the Old Testament talks about this sort of thing. You're going to have a good life. The book of Proverbs is all about how to have a good life. Thankfully, we've got Ecclesiastes to balance us out a little bit, right? He just got done writing about a good life, and now you've got Solomon, at least in part, endorsing this mindset of, well, I did everything right, and yet still my life kind of stinks. Well, maybe you didn't do everything right, but time and chance still happen to us all, okay? But here's the principle. The Old Testament, in a very big way, focuses on you will have good success. You will prosper. And there is nothing wrong with this. We should want to. But now Jesus comes, and just like he does in the rest of Matthew, come on, what does he do in the rest of Matthew 5? He said, you have heard that it was said in old times, right? But I say unto you, you have heard that it was said in old times, but I say unto you, that's what he's doing in the first 12 verses. This is what he's doing. He's doing this rabbi tradition of saying he sits down and opens his mouth. By the way, opens his mouth has to do with like the rabbi teaching, right, to pray. And he begins to say unto them, blessed. And people say, oh, here we go. But you know, I wonder, maybe they were thinking, oh, he got the wrong group of people. He's got the wrong group of people. We're not prospering. Yeah. He's talking to the wrong group. He thinks he's in a synagogue. You get the idea? We're just trash. We've just followed him up on a mountain. We're just fishermen. But Jesus didn't have the wrong group. Yeah. Jesus was instituting the upside down kingdom, man. The first shall be trash and the trash shall be first. How's that? This is awesome. Just check this out. I'm going to quote Stanley Hauerwas. He's actually still alive. That's not nice. No, I mean, when I read the quote, I was like, oh, this is from a man who's long gone, many years. He's still alive. He's a great theologian. Listen to what he said. Listen. It's a long quote, but you've got to tune in. I'm begging you. He says this. Too often, these characteristics, the Beatitudes, have in Christian history been turned into ideals or virtues that we must strive to attain. When we do that, we turn them into formulas that help us gain status and favor with God, which is, of course, the opposite of what Jesus is trying to say. Rather, they are the descriptions of the kind of people to whom Jesus, in fact, first brought the kingdom of God. Nowhere does Jesus tell us that we should try to be poor in spirit or mourn all the time or try to get yourself persecuted. He simply announces the great surprise. That these people who are not significant or honored in their society are precisely the ones who have received the honor to be first among those called into God's kingdom. Amen. End quote. Boy, that's a good quote. I wrote the word brilliant after it in my note. So that's what makes this so startling. Jesus, like any other Jewish teacher, is delivering a list of blessings. But his list of blessings departed from the healthy, wealthy, and wise platitudes that were delivered to those who were of a certain social status. He was changing everything. You see what Jesus is doing here? He's changing everything. Now let's unpack these 9 blessings. Tim Mackey, he used this illustration that these 9 blessings are like 9 shards that form a stained glass window. And when we're done, we're going to take a look at the stained glass window as a whole. Make sense so far? Okay, cool. Watch this. All right. Blessed are the poor in spirit. What does this mean? There's actually been a debate raging. I make it sound worse than it is. It's not raging. It's mildly festering. About what this poor in spirit means. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? Economically poor? Okay, no, it doesn't mean economically poor. It means spiritually poor. How does one be spiritually poor? Well, how are they not intertwined? You say, well, hold on. Brother Ray?
I was going to say, like a child with just accepting whatever their parents.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sure, and I think that's the way that it's been looked at. It's poor in spirit, knowing that one has nothing, and I think that ties very much into the truth of what Jesus is saying. Because Jesus is looking out at this crowd of people who knows what they are. They know what they are. They wake up every morning and say, I hate my life. I hate the choices I've made. I hate that I don't have any opportunities to rise up. They look in the mirror, they don't like who they see. They don't like their opportunities. They're sick of themselves. So listen, I'll just read what I wrote here. Let's talk about their setting. How are these two, poor economically, poor spiritually, how are they not intertwined? Because listen, more clearly in their culture than even in ours, their difficult financial circumstances automatically invalidated their spiritual worth or input. I have heard it here said by someone who no longer goes here that we have a bunch of undesirables in our church. Look, I don't know if you don't desire them, but those are exactly the people that Jesus came for, was the undesirables. Yeah, it was Josh. No, it wasn't. It was the undesirable. Oh, he is an undesirable. Okay, right on. Me too. Join the club. Man, come on, you know me. I don't get up here and we don't have the production values. We don't have the big words. We don't have, Kevin actually had some big words this morning in Sunday school. You should listen to those. But we don't have everything that everybody else has. I have zero desire to attract the healthy, wealthy, and wise. So if you want to come, I am so thankful for you, as long as you realize that you are broken too, just as much as anybody else in these chairs.
Amen.
So, more clearly in their culture than even in ours, their difficult financial circumstances automatically invalidated their spiritual worth or input. If you have a president speaking, and then you have somebody who, say, sells pillows for a living, get up there and talk about read your Bibles, spend time with your family. You say, I don't like the president. It's fine if you don't like the president, but the point I'm making is this. This man got up there, and the first question out of the elite's mouth was, who is this guy? Who is this guy? You understand my point? He's just an idiot who sells pillows. Who is he? You understand? And they invalidate him because he doesn't have the social status, and so they demerit, they devalue, they don't listen to what he has to say. It would be as if I got up and said, my fellow American, the first thing they do is say, what's this guy's degree in? Have you ever noticed why one of the first lines people ask you is, what do you do? Come on. What do you do? Oh, I work at McDonald's. Oh, that's nice. I'm just going to start saying I'm in finance because I do touch dollar bills every once in a while. You know, I'm in finance. I'm in telecommunications and finance.
There you go.
Anyways, I sell cell phones. You know what I mean? But look at how we do that, right? If you say, oh, I work at McDonald's, what is the immediate thought? Oh, okay. Now, as Christians, we're pretty good about it, right? Oh, well, that's nice. You can, but we're not always that great about it. But especially out there in the world, if you get up there and you say something, people say, I'm not going to listen to somebody with a mid-college education. We devalue people. Now, if there's some merit to saying I want somebody to be qualified before talking, sure. But we so often devalue people. Now, here's the deal. Those who are in the most difficult circumstances economically are often the most receptive spiritually. Can anybody think of a time when Jesus said something like that? Something about an eye and a needle and a camel. Yeah. Jesus was saying, hey, it's more difficult. You get the idea? More difficult for a rich person to enter heaven than for a camel to go to the eye of a needle. He said, this is nearly impossible. Why? Because they were the spiritual elite. They weren't poor in spirit. They didn't have any arms open to be filled. They had it full of their own desires and elitism. Yes. So, I just wrote here, Jesus highlights that it is precisely because of their economic shortcomings and inevitably linked spiritual shortcomings, real or perceived, that they will be the first to receive the kingdom of heaven. Jesus says to them, oh, you're poor? You're about to be rich. You have nothing? You get to be in the kingdom. Hey, this is cool. I didn't think about this till now, but just hang in there. When the Bible describes the gates of pearl and it has the 12 tribes of Israel on there, Israelites were a bunch of freed slaves, nomads. And then he has the name of 12 disciples there, right? Also on the gate. Read it. You had the gate with a tribe and then also the disciple. I forgot exactly where, but it's right near that. A couple verses down. Why? The disciples were nobodies. But they're first, literally, come on, Saint, literally first. They're the first names you see when you enter into heaven. Why? Because they were trash. They were trash. There's a tax collector. Yeah. Trash. Fisherman. Trash. He gets his clothes from the thrift store. You get the idea? Poor. Poor in every way. Poor in spirit. Poor economically. The have-nones are about to be the have-all. We're going to tackle the next 3 Beatitudes together in a chunk. You'll understand why in a second. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Now, hunger and thirst after righteousness sounds very pious. It does. Say, my God, I hunger and thirst after righteousness. That's not at all what this means in this text. This is one of the ones I got wrong. Watch. Think about a time lately when you were very thirsty. Isn't it a fun experience to be thirsty and have nothing to drink? Come on, I thought we should want to hunger and thirst. Shouldn't we want, come on. Here's a bottle of water. I loved it. I remember one time we were out. We were doing some door knocking for hours and hours and hours. A part of an internship I did. It was great. And I was thirsty. So thirsty. When I finally got water, when the desire cometh, right? It was the tree of life. My hope was deferred, and I finally got it. Oh, oh, it was so good. But I don't like being thirsty. I don't like being hungry, clearly. Come on, saints. I don't like being thirsty and hungry. Now listen. Jesus, this visceral longing, Jesus taps into this experience when he lifts the concept right from the Hebrew Scriptures. I've already explained to you that righteousness in the Hebrew Scriptures always has to do with being right between two parties. So now we're looking at the outcast, the marginalized, the devalued, the invalid, the pariahs. Have they been treated righteously?
No.
Have they been treated rightly by their neighbors?
No.
Have they been treated fairly? No. The righteousness after which they are... Well, just let me read what I wrote so I don't get myself in trouble. Righteousness is rightness, and an act of righteousness means doing right by somebody. It's always a relational term. It has to do with doing what is right or just or proper. Someone who is righteous is someone who has always done right by his promises and does right by their neighbor. So Jesus is talking to those who have a deep longing for righteousness to be done because they currently don't see it.
Right.
They are marginalized. People aren't doing right by them, and people aren't doing right by each other. So it's not wrong to say that they desire the righteousness of God, but let's not make it so pious that it's something that only the most holy people do. They just want to see things done right.
Yeah.
They just want to see righteousness. God's righteousness, yes. God's justice, yes. But in the context of, we need to see it in our world. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe with all my heart that if you are a believer who's read any minutes of this book for any number of minutes, and then you look out in the world and you see the corruption of the Fortune 500 company, the airlines cramming people out like sardines and crashing the airplanes because they can't figure out how to put an engine on the wing. Come on, saints. And you see all the wickedness and the despair and the unfairness, and you can't even build a building without going through months of permits because there's people who take advantage of the system, so they have to put a bunch of safeguards in place that make right people suffer and wrong people inconvenienced. And you can't tell me that we see justice and righteousness being done in our nation. It's not. When your tax dollars go to murder babies, is that just?
No.
No. When they have to have, why do I have to type in a password for my email?
Yeah, come on.
Why do I have to type in a password for my email? Well, so nobody else gets in it. It's like an obvious 21st century answer. Can you imagine? You can't even imagine a world when you don't have to type in a password for something. I can't. Even when I log into my camera, I got to have a password. So there's some there. Brunswick just had a town office meeting on Zoom. It was interrupted. You want to know what, or Bath or Brunswick, one of the two. You want to know what it was interrupted by? Some people who were inserting pornographic images into their town office meeting using technology. Because they exploited a way to work around passwords. We live in a wicked world. And the minute you say, oh man, it's just getting better out there, you don't hunger and thirst for righteousness at all.
That's right.
You understand my point? You don't have a desire to see things done right because you think it's all done right. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. A hunger and a thirst for righteousness is to see things done right. To see people treating each other right. Does it bother you when people litter? It should, because it's not right. Does it bother you when people blaze past you on the highway? It should, because it's not right. And by the way, the more we participate in these sins, the less they'll bother us. Does that make sense? The more distant we are from these sins, the more we'll see the not rightness about them.
Yes.
People joke about sexual sin all the time in a way that condones it. I think probably we're all guilty of joking around about stuff we shouldn't, but I'm talking about in a way that condones it. TV shows that make you root for people to hook up before they're married. Yeah, they finally got together. You understand my point? I call it Ross and Rachel syndrome. You're watching a program and then you realize, whoa, wait a minute. I'm actually rooting for these two. You understand my point? And they desensitize us so much, they anesthetize us toward these wickednesses that we don't hunger and thirst for righteousness because we don't see anything wrong.
Yeah, come on.
God says, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be filled. So Jesus highlights, let me, right here, I was in the wrong part of my notes. Here it is. So the people who are marginalized desire justice and fairness and right relationships. And Jesus says, in my kingdom, you shall have it. You shall have it. So that colors in what it means to mourn. Blessed are those who mourn. Why are they mourning? They're bothered and hurt by the tragedy and evil and brokenness and the sin everywhere in the world. Does that make sense? Have you ever mourned because things have happened to you that should not have happened to you? Have you ever mourned? I hope so. I know I have. I mourn because this world is not the way it should be. The Apostle Paul writes creatively and poetically. He says all creation groans because this world is not the way it should be. Jesus is looking at these people and he knows his audience. And he says, you are the mourning one. You are the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness. You are the ones who look at the world and see it for what it really is. Because you aren't looking from the eyes of a Pontius Pilate. You aren't looking from the eyes of a Julius Caesar. You aren't looking from the eye of a Brutus. You aren't looking from the eyes of Octavius. You aren't looking from the eye of the Antiochus Epiphanes of the world. You are looking from the eyes of somebody who's on the ground floor, boots on the ground. You don't own shares in a Fortune 500 company. You hunger and thirst for things to be done right and to be treated fairly. I long for that more than ever. When I see how the larger people and corporations get, the more they exploit the little people. And don't say it ain't so, because it is. There's exceptions, but on the whole, I'm not. You say, boy, you sound like a socialist. No, come on. Let companies get as big as they want legally. But the problem is, most of the time it's not legally. They find loopholes, exploitation, lobbying. Come on, it's corrupt. From the very beginning of the process all the way up to the Senate, it's corrupt. So I hunger and thirst for rightness, and I mourn because it's not here. So often people dull the pain of a broken world with television and distractions. I read this morning in the news that there's a series finale of Modern Family. I've never seen Modern Family. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I have no desire to see the show Modern Family because it represents a very modern family that's apart from God's structure of the family. Does that make sense? You know, among other reasons. And they're having a 2-hour series finale. Okay, understandable. Sure, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I'm not trying to be, Puritan Jedediah here. But why will millions and millions of people watch this idyllic picture of a perfect family? Everybody's laughing, having a good time, where all the injustices are pretty much solved, and they found a way to navigate because it's fake. Come on, saints, it's fake. So to those who can't or won't imagine away the brokenness, Jesus says, blessed are you who are mourning. In my kingdom, you'll be comforted. What about the other one? What it means to be meek. In this context, it's crystal clear that we're not talking about the meekness of Moses. Remember, who is Jesus talking to? Who is he describing? He's describing the people that are sitting around him listening. And these people that are sitting around him listening do not have tremendous power but are not using it. What do we say meekness is? Power under submission, right? Yes, but in this context, the Greek word here for meekness just means, I wrote it down here, humble, and you can look it up in the Merriam-Webster, easily imposed upon. There is a difference between being voluntarily meek, that's Jesus, and involuntarily meek, that's this crowd right here. Meek, quiet, humble, imposed upon, they're doormats. Yeah. You understand? Yeah. I look at meek, I have no problem with this definition of meek, a doormat. You say, no, wait a minute. No, I'm not saying that the doormat doesn't have power to not be a doormat. But come on, Jesus Christ was led like a sheep was led through the slaughter, and he didn't even open his mouth or utter a word. People trampled on him like a doormat, and he laid down his life willingly. These people were not yet in a willing state of laying down their lives. They were already being trampled upon by the powers that be. He wasn't calling them to be meek. He was saying that's what they were. Do you understand the point? He was describing them. Remember the big quote that I read? This is not something Jesus is saying. You should aspire to be meek. He was addressing them where they were. So we say meekness isn't weakness. And that's true if we have power and we're choosing to be meek. But when This word here carries an understanding of you are unable to inherit anything on your own. Because this is so important. Oh, this is so big. There's so many good truths here, and I'm trying to cruise through. But how did they inherit power in the Roman society? They killed, they lied, they stole, they cajoled. Come on. They did everything unscrupulous possible to get it. And Jesus says, you're meek, you don't have power to receive it. It's going to be given to you. Come on. Come on. Again, this is not Jesus calling people to certain characteristics. He's calling it like he sees it. Jesus says, in my kingdom, you'll inherit the earth. I'm going to prove all this right at the very end. Watch. Oh, and by the way, just because Jesus isn't calling people to aspire to be these things, doesn't mean that contradicts what I said at the beginning, that this is an accurate description of a life of someone who does follow Jesus. Because as you follow Jesus and as you enter into his kingdom, you will notice that you don't need to assert your power, that you are okay with being meek. You will notice that you don't need to assert your own righteousness. You are okay with allowing God to have vengeance in mind, saith the Lord. I will repay, and allow him to mete out the justice and not you. Okay? So keep going. We're going to cruise through the rest of them best we can. 46 minutes. We're doing okay. Blessed are the merciful. Mercy is simply an act of care and compassion toward one's neighbor. Now, was anybody in the Roman society showing mercy at this time?
No.
Right? Was Rome known for mercy? Come on, saints. No. No one looked to the outcast to be models of success. They looked at the Roman elite. But Jesus said, even though you're considered worthless and undeserving of mercy, it is in these small clans of outcasts that we often see the tenderest acts of mercy. I see more homeless people giving to each other than I see religious elite, or excuse me, economically elite giving to others. Well, Jeff Bezos just gave $100,000. And I'm not saying that's bad. That's not a bad thing. And I understand he doesn't just have billions of dollars in stacks of cash. A lot of that's in shareholder worth. But please don't misunderstand me. I am a lot more impressed with the homeless person who gives the rest of his can of beans to somebody who hasn't eaten in 2 days than I am for the richest man in the world to give $100,000. Or $1 million. Come on, saints. Or $100 million, whatever it was. Probably $100 million. Jesus himself said to the Pharisee, you're giving a bunch of stuff, and you should, but you've overlooked the weightier matters of the law. Jesus talked about the woman who gave 2 pennies. She gave all that she had, so she gave more. So Jesus is trying to point out that even though mercy didn't have a place in the Fortune 500 economics of Rome, remember, you ever heard the phrase, mercy is for the weak? The Cobra Kai dojo, right? Come on. Versus Daniel LaRusso. And here's Daniel LaRusso, meek and mild, does a little crane kick, surprises everybody. Because you got Mr. Miyagi, he's just quiet and reserved. Come on, this is a cool illustration. And you got, what's his face? Sensei, I can't remember the name. But he goes up to Johnny, sweep the leg. What? Sweep the leg. And they're going crazy. Who actually wins in the end? The meek one. The meek one. The merciful one. It's a cool illustration. So in a Roman Judea, mercy was for the weak. But in this fallen, broken corner of the world that Jesus was addressing, the meek outcast still had room in their heart for mercy. And Jesus said, in my kingdom, you will be shown mercy. You're not being shown it right now in Rome, but in my kingdom, you will be. What's the next one? Blessed are the pure in heart. Told you we'd speed up. Here we go. The outcast of society had no intention of being like their oppressors. Nobody in this group that was following Jesus said, when I grow up, I want to hurt people. No, because they'd experienced that pain themselves. Yeah. All right? So let's skip right through this one and just keep on going. I'll read here. The poor misfits of a Roman-controlled state had no desire to be like the ones that caused them and their world so much pain. In addition, the religious leaders of the day, the economically rich and affluent elite Pharisees and lawyers, were pure outwardly, but they were not pure in heart. And they controlled the world. You say, no, they didn't. Oh, come on. When it came to crucifying Jesus, who really was the spearhead behind that? The religious elite. They were the ones. They formed an unholy alliance with the government. So Jesus says, they won't let you into their religious caste system where they're pure outwardly, but in my kingdom, you'll see God. Pure in heart. How about this one? Blessed are the peacemakers. 2 left after this. You're doing great. In a world of war, position jockeying, and conflict, the concept of peace and reconciliation had about as much of a place as mercy did. Right? Right? Sure. Fortune 500 companies that keep thinking, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Fortune 500 company, but I'm just saying most of them are run with a certain cutthroat, two strikes, you get the idea? And they have policies in place, we've got to run it. I understand that. I'm not saying we shouldn't have policies, but was Rome known for harmony and forgiveness and peace? No. So would a Roman-occupied state be known for it? No. The order of the day was power, cruelty, and authority. There was no peace other than that which was brought about by superior swordsmanship, wealth, subtlety, and bloodlines. So it was especially countercultural for people to desire peace and be non-combatants. Does that make sense? Because the only way you were ever going to get peace is if you fought your way into it. If you took lives to secure it. In fact, the word peacemaker, if you look at I didn't include a lot of Greek words. I didn't include any in my notes. But if you look at the Greek, look it up in your lexicon or whatever, you'll find that word peacemaker is translated pacifist just as easily. The word's in the definition. You say, oh no, what are you talking about? No. You ever seen a pacifier? Come on, Saints, a pacifier in a baby. Wah, wah, stick it in. They are pacified. They are at peace. This is great. All right. Those who said, I'm not fighting, but rather laid down their lives like Jesus, they were the ones who heard Jesus say, in my kingdom you will be my children. Why? Because Jesus is the Prince of Peace. In John 8:44 we learn that people who lie are of their father the devil. And then Jesus said, if you are peacemakers, if you pursue peace, and instead of taking lives, lay down your own, you will be my children. You will be my children. He is describing this group of people that is a non-combatant people. They've already surrendered to the fact that we are the outcasts. We are the ones who are trampled upon. He said, don't you worry. You not fighting, you not raising arms against your authority, you will be my children. You are the first one to whom the kingdom gets. Now, here's the last 2 points. We're going to tackle them together. It's very easy. First, Jesus deals with those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Then he narrows it down more specifically to his own name's sake. The two are inseparable, Jesus and righteousness. It was not a possibility, but rather a very likely probability that this rabble of outcasts would be persecuted even further because of their values and commitments to follow Jesus. As he's introducing the kingdom to them, they say, yes, we are going to follow you. I am so humbled that you would give us the kingdom first. We're going to be with you, Jesus. They would be looked upon by the surrounding powers that be and authorities and say, who do you think you are? Why are you following this Jesus? It's so different. It's so unknown. It's not right. And they would be persecuted. Well, how do these last couple of blessings apply to you? We're not being killed every day. Well, do we not still suffer some kind of persecution? Here's what I mean. Have you ever been denied a job opportunity because you won't work Sundays? I have. Thankfully, not my current job. It's awesome. Or you want to be in church Wednesday night. You get the idea? Have you ever been denied a good relationship? When somebody found out that you were a follower of Jesus Christ and you lived your life a certain way, they distanced themselves from you. You don't get invited to the birthday party, graduation party, holiday parties. You don't. I've experienced that. How about this? This is the big one. This is the most important one to me. Have you ever been in a situation where because you've been a follower of Jesus, false beliefs are automatically attributed to you? Oh, you're a Christian? You must hate the gays.
Yeah.
What kind of an association is that? But look at what the Bible says. He says, blessed are ye if men shall revile you. No. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. You want to know what the earliest bad rumor, one of the earliest bad rumors about Christianity was? That they were cannibals. Because at the feast in John 5, 6, 7, 8, Jesus said, I am the bread of life, and people ran with that. And if you read some of the early letters, Pliny the Elder and all, and Trajan, they're talking about, yeah, this cannibalism thing, I didn't see him eating people or whatever. Because there was a rumor that people actually ate people in Christianity. They were cannibals. Because they did communion. And Jesus said, this is my body, this is my blood, this do in remembrance of me. That's what it is, a remembrance. An important and sacred one, but a remembrance. Not cannibalism. Looks like the Roman Catholic Church rolled with that a little bit too far, right? We understand that. Now, to these people who are persecuted, Jesus says, yours is the kingdom of heaven. And while you may not have rewards here, Jesus says, in my kingdom, great is your reward. Last half a page, you've made it. So there we have it. These are the 9 blessings. Jesus was describing what his followers looked like and why they, above all, have the blessings of the kingdom of heaven, not those who sought to acquire them for themselves or thought they already had them because of their bloodlines. Now, remember what we said about that stained glass window? Here's the cool part, man. This is awesome. Remember what we said about the stained glass window? Each one of these 9 blessings is a shard in the stained glass window. And if we put it up together here, who would you see a picture of? Just say it.
Christ.
Yeah, Jesus. Jesus, the man. Why? Listen, Jesus was poor in spirit. Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. And the religious elite hated him. Why? He didn't have access to these socioeconomic religious elite clubs. Jesus was meek. Unlike this rabble, he was meek because he laid down his power. He laid down his power. He was the mourning one. He mourned. Oh, come on, it's right there. And when he saw Matthew chapter 9, when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. He mourned for them. And he said, oh, Israel, I would have you gather like under my wings, like I was a mother hen and you were my chicks, right? He mourned, he grieved for Israel. Because he saw that they were not being righteous. How about this? He longed to see, he was hungry and thirsty for righteousness, wasn't he? He desired to come and to seek and to save all those that were lost and restore them to a new humanity that did the right thing. He was merciful. He was pure in heart. He was a pacifist. Are you saying the military? No, just don't go there. I'm not talking about the USA Army. I'm talking about you. When Peter cut off Malchus's ear, Jesus put it back on. How much more of an example do you need? That our God is a God of non-violence to our enemies. And if you don't believe it, just hang in there for a couple of weeks and we'll see where Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Literally. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth right here. Verse 39 of Matthew chapter 5. And if he sues you and takes away your coat, give him more than the required settlement. Come on. Well, that's just not just. Yes, that's right. That's exactly the point. Well, if he hits me, I should be able to. You are able to defend yourself, but meekness is laying it down. Yes. Because if Jim Elliot had killed them Auca Indians, but instead he died for them. This isn't even on. He died for them, and then they came to life. Come on. The gospel has to die in order to live in others. So Jesus was saying, peace is the way. Oh. By the way, in the Battle of Armageddon, we're going to be with Jesus, but who's the one carrying the sword?
Jesus.
The mouth sword? Jesus. I'm going to hack them to pieces! No, the pattern's not going to change from then till now. Jesus will always avenge us. Jesus will be our avenger. We, peacemakers. Pacify. And then lastly, he was persecuted and reviled. Do you not see? Jesus is calling us to be himself. He is saying, this is what you are. He went to the rabble because that's the group that he associated with the most. And rather than say, I want you to go get persecuted, he said, this is the description of people who follow me because this is who I am. And as we follow Jesus, we become more like him. And as we become more like him, we become more like this rabble. And as we become more like this rabble, these 9 blessings apply to us because we now look like the recipients of that blessing. Does that make sense? So I just wrote here in closing, You may not feel very important. You may not feel listened to. You may not feel blessed. You may not be treated correctly. You may have been lied about. You may not feel very successful. You may not feel well off. You may not even feel happy. You may have people make fun of you. You may have people call you crazy. You may have people call you names. You may have people treat you wrong. And you might even begin to think that they're right. But that just means you're more like Jesus than ever.
Amen.
And it just means you're blessed.
Amen.
Lord, I love you, and I thank you for the day that you've given us in church. Thank you for allowing us to have this description of the followers of Jesus. Not as some sort of laundry list that we check off and make sure that we see in us, but rather a way that we can see you in us. Lord, your kingdom is totally upside down. Your kingdom calls us to a place of lowliness, meekness, peace, justice. It calls us to a place of mercy and forgiveness and reconciliation and radical love. Because that's who you are. And Lord, this is the very best of humanity. You are the very best of humanity. And you came as a human to show us that. The ultimate rabbi teaching the ultimate truths about blessings. That to be closest to you, we'd be closest to your Son, and your Son was closest to the lowest of the low, who made himself to be a little lower than the angels, took upon himself the form of a servant, made himself of no reputation, found in the likeness of men. God, you've shown us in these 9 blessings the kind of people into which we will be transformed as we follow you. And we read here of the promise of blessings, that we will inherit your kingdom as we follow you and are continuing to be transformed into your image. Thank you for this promise. We rejoice in it, and we are inspired to remain the kind of people that you have called us to be, or become closer to you so that you can transform us into the people we ought to be. In Jesus' name, amen. Saints, thank you for your patience. A little longer than I had anticipated, but what else is new? I love you. I hope I will see you tonight for the Minutes with Michael on my personal page. A little update there and some fun. If you need anything, please let me know. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day of rest in the Lord. Enjoy your meals together, and I miss you so much. You know me. I miss you. I want to see all of you. But until that time, be well.